Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. Before I begin my story, I want you to know that sharing this is not easy. It's a story about family, about trust, and about the quiet betrayals that can cut deeper than any overt act of cruelty. It's a story about being underestimated. If you've ever felt like your age has suddenly become a synonym for incompetence in the eyes of the people who should respect you most, then perhaps you'll understand. Please subscribe to the channel if you find value in stories like this, and perhaps like or share this video so that others who feel unseen might find it. It helps more than you know. My name is Judith Sterling, and I am 72 years old. For 45 of those years, I was married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, my Robert. Robert was a force of nature, a brilliant, shrewd businessman with a laugh that could shake the rafters and a heart that was as soft as summer rain. He was the public face of our life, the one who chaired the committees, who made the speeches, whose name was synonymous with success in our quiet, comfortable corner of the world. I was the silent partner, not just in our marriage, but in everything. I was the one who read the fine print, the one who saw the patterns in the stock market that he missed, the one who would sit with him at our heavy oak dining table late into the night, a single lamp illuminating piles of financial statements, and say, "No, not that one, Rob, this one. Look at their debt-to-asset ratio." He would look at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and he'd say, "You see things I don't, Jude. This isn't my portfolio, it's ours." And it was. It truly was. When Robert passed away 2 years ago, it felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. The silence in our home was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all the joy we had built. My son Andrew was there, of course. He's my only child. In the initial fog of grief, his attentiveness felt like a comfort. He would call every day. He'd bring groceries. He would sit with me and talk about his father, sharing memories that seemed to momentarily fill the cavernous emptiness of the house. But as the months wore on, the nature of his concern began to shift. It became managerial. The questions changed from "How are you feeling, Mom?" to "Did you pay the property tax bill yet? And you should really think about downsizing." My spending, he told me one evening, was becoming erratic. This was a new word in his vocabulary, one he wielded with the clumsy certainty of someone who has just learned a new and powerful spell. What was this erratic spending? I had increased my monthly donation to the local animal shelter, a place Robert and I had supported for decades. After he was gone, the thought of all those lonely creatures waiting for a home resonated with me more deeply. I sent them $500 a month, up from our usual $200. I also developed a passion for collecting books, specifically first edition copies of my favorite classic novels. Holding a book that was printed a century ago, feeling the weight of its history, smelling the aged paper, it was a tangible connection to a world outside my own grief. It made me feel less alone. I bought a first edition of Middlemarch for $300. I found a lovely copy of The Age of Innocence for a little less than that. This, in Andrew's eyes, was akin to lighting a bonfire with stacks of $100 bills. He started subtly at first. "Mom, do you really need another old book? The house is full of them." Then it became more direct. "That's a lot of money to be giving away." Dad was generous, but he was also prudent. The implication was clear. I was not. I was a flighty, sentimental old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own money, the money that I had helped earn, that I had helped grow, that I had managed with meticulous care for nearly half a century. The final stage of his campaign was the most insidious. He sat me down one Sunday afternoon, his face a mask of practiced solemnity. "Mom," he began, his voice oozing a sort of rehearsed empathy that set my teeth on edge. "I'm worried about you. You're grieving. It's easy for people to take advantage. And keeping track of all these bills, these accounts, it's a lot. I just want to help. Let me make it easier for you. If you add me as an administrator on your primary credit card account, I can help you monitor for fraud. I can help you pay the balance online. It's just for your peace of mind, for your own protection. I am not a fool. I saw the glint of control in his eyes, but I was so tired. I was tired of fighting the silence in the house, tired of the crushing weight of my own sorrow, and most of all tired of the widening gulf between my son and me. I thought, perhaps, this was a bridge, a misguided, clumsy, disrespectful bridge, but a bridge nonetheless. If this small concession would keep him in my life, if it would soothe his strange and sudden anxiety, then so be it. So, against every instinct that Robert had ever taught me, I agreed. I signed the form. It felt like a small surrender, but I told myself it was a strategic one, a gesture of maternal love. That was my mistake. I had mistaken a power grab for a plea for connection. The inciting incident, the moment the curtain was pulled back to reveal the ugly machinery behind his concern, came 3 weeks later. The public library, another institution Robert and I had championed, announced a fundraising drive for a new children's literacy wing. Robert had learned to love reading there as a boy. It felt right. I made a one-time donation of $5,000 using my credit card. It was a significant amount, but it was a fraction of my liquid assets, a drop in the ocean of the fortune I had helped build. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Andrew. He didn't even say hello. $5,000 to the library. Are you out of your mind? His voice was sharp, brittle with an anger he didn't even try to conceal. I took a slow, calming breath. Andrew, it was for the new literacy wing, in your father's memory. His memory? You're throwing away my inheritance in his memory. That's what this is about, isn't it? You're just burning through it all before I can get any of it. The cruelty of it, the raw, naked greed, sucked the air from my lungs. My inheritance. He had already laid claim to it in his mind. I was no longer his mother. I was merely the dragon guarding his treasure, and my erratic spending was me nibbling away at the gold pile. My voice, when I finally found it, was ice. Andrew, I said, my tone dangerously quiet, you seem to be under a grave misapprehension. The money I have is my money. It is not, nor will it ever be, your inheritance until I am dead. And even then, your current behavior is doing little to recommend you. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, and then a click. He had hung up on me. I stood in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, a cold dread creeping through my veins. An hour passed. I tried to read, but the words swam on the page. Then my laptop chimed with a new email. The subject line read, "An update regarding your Mid-Valley Regional Trust Premier Select account." I opened it. The text was brief and brutally corporate. Dear Mistress Sterling, this email is to confirm that, at the request of an authorized account administrator, your Premier Select card ending in 4321 has been canceled. We understand this action was taken for your protection. If you believe this was an error, please contact our customer service department for your protection. The words echoed the phrase Andrew had used. It was his declaration of victory. He had cut me off. He had taken away my primary tool for daily life, the card I used for groceries, for gas, for my books and my charities, as if he were a parent taking car keys from a reckless teenager. The humiliation was a physical thing. It burned in my chest, a hot, acrid shame. I felt small. I felt powerless. I felt old, and I realized with a sudden, devastating clarity that this was exactly how he wanted me to feel. I sank into the armchair by the window, the one Robert always used to sit in, and for the first time since his funeral, I wept. I didn't cry for the loss of my credit card. I cried for the loss of my son, the boy I had raised, The man I thought I knew had been replaced by this cold, calculating stranger who saw me not as his mother, but as an obstacle, an incompetent elderly woman whose assets needed to be protected from her own sentimentality, preserved for his future benefit. The silence of the house no longer felt like grief, it felt like a judgment, and in that moment, sitting in the gathering dark, I felt utterly and completely alone. The betrayal wasn't in the act itself, but in the chilling ease with which he had committed it. He had judged me, found me wanting, and summarily dismissed me from my own life. The night after Andrew canceled my card was one of the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark. The email with its galling phrase, "For your own protection," burned onto the back of my eyelids. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. I felt the patronizing pat on the head, the condescending smile. It was a dismissal of my entire life, of my intellect, of my partnership with Robert. My son looked at me and saw a dottery old woman, a liability. The grief that had been a constant dull ache for 2 years sharpened into something else entirely. It became a blade of pure cold anger. I found myself drifting back in time, not as a comfort, but as a clarification. The memories came unbidden, pieces of a puzzle falling into place to form a picture I had refused to see. I remembered a night 30 years ago. Andrew was in college, and Robert and I were at the dining table, buried in paperwork as we so often were. We were structuring the acquisition of a small, struggling local bank, Mid-Valley Regional Trust. It was undervalued, poorly managed, but had deep roots in the community. Robert saw the potential for a turnaround, but I saw the strategic value. "We do it through holding companies, Rob," I had said, tapping a prospectus with my pen. "At least 3, Crestview Equity, Northgate Investments, and a new one we'll call R&J Holdings for us." Robert had looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. He loved it when I got like this, when the quiet, bookish woman he married transformed into a boardroom tactician. "Why so complicated, Jude?" he'd asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because privacy is the only luxury we can't buy off the shelf," I'd replied. "I don't want our name on a plaque in the lobby. I don't want every charity in the state knocking on our door. I don't want Andrew growing up with the weight of that name. We'll be the ghosts in the machine, the silent majority owners. No one needs to know but us and our most trusted people." Robert had reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "This is why it's ours, Jude," he'd said. "You see the whole chessboard. We built our empire in the quiet shadows, a fortress of financial privacy that allowed us to live a normal life, or as close to it as we could get. We weren't recluses, but we were discreet. Our wealth was a tool, not an identity." Andrew, it seemed, had never understood the distinction. He had only ever seen the fruits of our labor, never the labor itself. Another memory surfaced, this one more painful. Andrew, home from college for the summer. Robert had tried to get him an internship at one of the smaller companies we had a stake in, a manufacturing plant an hour away. Real work, grimy, difficult, character-building work. Andrew had lasted 3 days. He'd come home complaining about the heat, the noise, the foreman who didn't appreciate his big-picture ideas. "Dad, it's pointless," he'd whined over dinner. "I'm meant for strategy, for the boardroom, not the factory floor." Robert had looked at him, his disappointment a palpable thing in the room. "Son," he'd said, his voice heavy, "you can't command the ship if you've never swabbed the deck. You don't respect what you don't understand." Andrew had just rolled his eyes, utterly convinced of his own superiority. He never went back. He saw the business as a magic box that produced money, and he felt it was his birthright to simply be handed the key. He had no interest in how the box was built or how the magic inside it actually worked.
He didn't want to learn the family business. He wanted to inherit it. That memory, more than any other, explained how he could be so breathtakingly ignorant of the true source of his family's stability. He had no idea. He'd just picked a fight with the ship's commander after complaining about the state of the deck. The final memory that haunted me that night was from the very end. Robert, frail and thin in the hospital bed, his hand clutching mine. His voice was a whisper, a dry rustle of leaves. "Don't let them change you, Jude," he'd said, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity. "And don't let Andrew's impatience get the better of him. He's a good boy, but he's weak in a way I don't think he'll ever understand. Guide him, but don't let him run over you. Promise me." "I promise, my love," I'd whispered back, my tears falling wan to our joined hands. And I had tried. For 2 years, I had tried to honor that promise. I had mistaken his impatience for grief, his greed for anxiety. I had let him walk all over me, convincing myself it was a form of guidance, of maternal patience. But as I sat there in the dark, the truth was stark and unavoidable. I had not been guiding him. I had been enabling him. My promise to Robert was not to be a doormat. It was to be strong. The boy Robert had called good was gone, replaced by a man who would financially cripple his own mother for a few $1,000s he felt entitled to. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale rose. The anger had cooled, settling into something hard and dense in the pit of my stomach. Resolve. The tears were gone. My hands were steady. The fog of grief had lifted, burned away by the fury of his betrayal. My son thought he had put me in a cage. He had no idea. He had just reminded me that I owned the whole zoo. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my movements measured and deliberate. I made a pot of coffee, the familiar ritual a comfort, and then I picked up the phone. My first call was not to Andrew. It was to my oldest and dearest friend, Margaret. Margaret answered on the second ring, her voice as brisk and no-nonsense as ever. "Judith, I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" "Oh, Margaret," I said, and despite my newfound resolve, my voice cracked. I told her everything: the erratic spending, the condescending concern, the conversation about the donation, and the final, brutal act of canceling my card. I read her the email.
There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said a single pungent word that I shall not repeat here, but it was immensely satisfying to hear. That little she caught herself. "Judith, that's not just disrespectful, that's elder abuse, financial control. You know my Caroline is trying something similar, albeit on a smaller scale. She wants me to sell the house. Says the upkeep is too much for me and I should move into a sensible condo." Sensible for whom, I asked her. The house is paid for. It's sensible for her because she wants to get her hands on the equity. They think our birth year is our IQ, Judith. They see gray hair and they immediately subtract 50 points from our intelligence. Hearing her story, so similar in its theme of filial presumption, was like a balm on my raw nerves. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't an outlier. This was a pattern. "What are you doing about Caroline?" I asked. I told her that if she mentions the condo one more time, I'm taking out a massive reverse mortgage and spending every last penny on a round-the-world cruise with a string of handsome young deckhands, she said with a wicked chuckle. Her face went pale. "But you, Judith, what he did to you is on another level. That's a declaration of war. What in God's name are you going to do?" I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me. The question hung in the air. For the last 2 years, my answer to any crisis would have been, I don't know. I would have been lost, adrift. But now the answer was clear. It came to me with the force of a revelation. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself, trying to believe it. It was about re-establishing order. It was about reminding my son of the rules of a game he didn't even know he was playing. Margaret, I said, my voice now perfectly calm, perfectly steady, I'm going to do what Robert and I always did. I'm going to protect our assets. She was quiet for a moment. Then good for you, Judith. You give him hell. After I hung up with Margaret, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The path forward was illuminated. It wasn't a path of anger and shouting, of emotional confrontations. That was Andrew's style. Mine and Robert's was one of quiet, decisive action. It was the rustle of papers, the quiet phone call, the silent transfer of power. It was a world Andrew had never bothered to learn. I pulled out my private ledger, a leather-bound book that Robert had given me on our 10th anniversary. It wasn't for our public accounts. This was the master key, the book that detailed the intricate web of holding companies and private trusts we had constructed over decades. R&J Holdings, Crestview Equity, Northgate Investments. I ran my finger down the page, my memory sharp and clear. Mid-Valley Regional Trust, controlling interest 57%, held via Crestview Equity. My next call was to David Chen, our private wealth manager for the last 30 years. David wasn't just an employee of a larger firm. He worked exclusively for us, a position of profound trust. He had started as Robert's protégé and had become a dear family friend, though Andrew only knew him as that finance guy Dad used. David, it's Judith Sterling, I said when he answered. Judith, it's good to hear your voice. Is everything all right? His tone was warm, but I could hear the underlying concern. He knew how I'd been since Robert's passing. Everything is about to be, David, I replied, a hint of steel in my voice that I hadn't used in years. I have 2 requests. First, I need a full updated prospectus on our holdings in Mid-Valley Regional Trust. I want to see board minutes, executive compensation reports, everything. Second, I need you to arrange a meeting for me with the bank's president, a Mr. Albright. Tell him it's a Crestview matter, and David, I'd like him to come to my home. This morning if possible. There was a pause. David was sharp. He knew Crestview matter was our code for something serious, a directive from the true owners. He also knew that summoning a bank president to one's home was not a standard request. Consider it done, Judith, he said, his voice now all business. I'll have the prospectus sent to your secure email within the hour, and I'll reach out to Albright's office immediately. I suspect his schedule will open up. He was right. Less than 90 minutes later, a discreet black sedan pulled into my driveway. A man in a perfectly tailored gray suit stepped out. This was Arthur Albright, President and CEO of Mid-Valley Regional Trust. He was in his late 50s, with a sharp, intelligent face and wary eyes. He knew he was being summoned, but he didn't know why. I met him at the door. Mr. Albright, I said, offering a polite but not overly warm smile. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Of course, Mr. Sterling, he said, his eyes scanning the comfortable but not ostentatious living room. He was trying to place me in the hierarchy. He knew Crestview Equity was the power behind the throne, but he likely pictured a boardroom of sharks in New York, not a gray-haired woman in a cardigan in a quiet suburban house. David Chen said it was a matter of some urgency. I gestured for him to sit in the armchair opposite Robert's. It is, I said, getting straight to the point. I had decided not to frame this as a domestic squabble. That would be weak. I would frame it as what it was, a corporate security failure. Mr. Albright, I began, my hands folded calmly in my lap. It has come to my attention that my personal Premier Select account with your bank was compromised yesterday. Specifically, a junior account administrator, an Andrew Sterling, was able to cancel the primary cardholder's account, my account, without my direct notarized in-person consent. He did so with a simple phone call. I let that hang in the air. As the beneficial owner of the majority stake in this institution, I find this to be a catastrophic failure of your security protocols. If a secondary user can so easily terminate the primary account holder's access to their funds, what does that say about the security of your other high net worth clients? It suggests a vulnerability that frankly terrifies me from an investment standpoint. Albright's face had gone from wary to pale. He was no longer trying to place me. He was seeing a ghost, the ghost of his largest and hitherto silent investor. He was visibly sweating. Mr. Sterling, I had no idea. This is completely unacceptable. I will launch an immediate and thorough investigation. The individuals responsible will be disciplined. I can assure you. I held up a hand, cutting him off. Discipline is a secondary concern, Mr. Albright. My primary concern now is risk assessment. This individual, Andrew Sterling, who happens to be my son, has demonstrated a stunning lack of judgment. It has made me question his financial stability, and by extension, any potential risk he might pose to the bank's assets. I paused, letting the implications sink in. Your bank holds the mortgage on his primary residence, does it not? And if I recall correctly, a significant business line of credit as well. Albright just nodded, his mouth a thin line. He understood. This wasn't about a credit card anymore. Therefore, I continued, I want the bank to initiate a special administrative review of all accounts, personal and commercial, associated with the name Andrew Sterling. I want a full and complete audit of his financial health, every asset, every liability, every transaction over the last 5 years. I need to understand the full picture of the risk he represents. This is a matter of fiduciary duty to the bank and to its primary shareholders. You will of course treat this with the utmost discretion. The look in Albright's eyes was one of dawning, horrified understanding. He was being asked to turn the full power of the bank's internal audit division on the son of the woman who owned the bank. It was a checkmate. Of course, Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The review will begin immediately. We will be in touch. After he left, I went to my study. Robert had kept meticulous files, and I had maintained them. I opened the large filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out the folder labeled Andrew. Inside, nestled among his childhood report cards and vaccination records, was a file from about 8 years ago. It was for a tech startup he had launched with a friend. It had failed spectacularly within a year, leaving him with over $200,000 in debt. Robert and I had bailed him out. We hadn't just given him the money. We had, through one of our other holdings, bought the debt from the original lender, and we had co-signed on a new restructured loan, a loan held by Mid-Valley Regional Trust, to save him from complete financial ruin. It was a loan that I, as the inheritor of Robert's estate, was still the primary guarantor for, a fact I was quite sure Andrew had conveniently forgotten. He thought we had just given him the cash. He had no idea he was still on the hook, and that the person holding the strings was me. I laid the documents out on the desk, his original defaulted loan, the new loan agreement with our signatures on it, his mortgage application, also with Mid-Valley. It was all there, a complete arsenal. My son had tried to take my keys, and he was about to find out that I owned the car, the dealership, and the road it was parked on. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again, my voice catching in the silent room, but a small cold part of me knew that was no longer entirely true. It had become about justice, and justice, I was beginning to realize, was going to be exquisitely, devastatingly precise. The next morning, the doorbell rang at precisely 9 o'clock. I opened it to find Arthur Albright standing on my porch, holding a sleek black velvet box. He looked like a man who had not slept. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice imbued with a new profound level of respect. My sincerest apologies again for yesterday's lapse. I have personally overseen the issuance of your new card. He opened the box. Nestled inside was a heavy metallic black card. It had no numbers on the front, only my name, Judith Sterling, elegantly engraved. This is our Obsidian Dominion card, he explained. It's by invitation only. There is no preset spending limit, and I can assure you, no changes can be made to this account by anyone but you. My personal mobile number is on the back. Any issues, you call me directly, day or night. I took the box. It was more than a credit card. It was a scepter.
It was a tangible symbol of the power I had quietly wielded for years, now brought out into the light. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, using his first name for the first time. "This is satisfactory." "Also," he continued, handing me a thick manila folder tied with a string, "the preliminary report on the special administrative review you requested. The full audit will take weeks, of course, but this is a top-level summary of Mr. Andrew Sterling's financial position." He cleared his throat. "As of 7 a.m. this morning, all accounts associated with his name have been placed under administrative freeze. No significant debits, transfers, or credit extensions can be made without manual override from my office, pending the outcome of the full review." I took the folder. "Excellent," I said. "Thank you for your efficiency." After he left, I sat down with a fresh cup of coffee and opened the folder. The numbers told a story of breathtaking irresponsibility. Andrew and his wife, Sarah, were living far beyond their means. A massive mortgage on a house they couldn't truly afford, 2 luxury car leases, and credit card debt spread across half a dozen banks. That was simply staggering. But the most damning part was the status of the business line of credit I had co-signed for. He had drawn it down to the absolute limit, and the interest payments were frequently late. He was juggling debt, robbing Peter to pay Paul, all while presenting a facade of effortless wealth. He wasn't just impatient, as Robert had said. He was a financial house of cards, and a strong breeze was coming. My phone rang just before noon. The caller ID said Andrew. I let it ring 4 times before I answered, my voice a placid pool of calm. "Hello, Andrew." Mom, what is going on?" The panic in his voice was undisguised. It was a raw, frayed thing. "I was just at the grocery store. They declined my card. All of my cards. I tried to take cash out at the ATM, and it said my account was restricted. I called the bank, and they're giving me the runaround, talking about some kind of administrative review. They won't tell me anything." "Did you do this? This has to be you." I feigned a gentle maternal confusion. "Andrew, why on earth would I do something like that? I have no idea what you're talking about. Honestly, I've been having my own banking issues, as you know." I allowed a slight tremor into my voice, a touch of the wounded elderly woman he thought I was. "Someone canceled my credit card yesterday. It was terribly distressing and confusing. I felt so vulnerable." I let him absorb that, twisting the knife of his own words just a little. But I continued, my tone brightening. "The most amazing thing happened this morning. The bank's president, Mr. Albright, came to the house personally to apologize. He brought me a beautiful new card, a lovely man. He was so concerned about my security." There was dead silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the pieces clicking together in a way that made no sense to him. His mother, the dotty old woman, was on a first-name basis with the president of the bank, the president who had just frozen his accounts. It was a bucket of ice water to the face. "Albright," he finally stammered. "Arthur Albright came to the house." "Yes, that's him," I said cheerfully. "He was so kind. He said the bank is taking my financial protection very, very seriously from now on." "Mom," he started, his voice a mixture of pleading and fury. "What did you do?" "I simply expressed my concern as a long-time customer, dear," I said, the picture of innocence. "You know, you were right. It really is important to be prudent. I have to go now, Andrew. I'm meeting my book club for lunch. Don't you worry about me. I'm perfectly fine." I hung up the phone before he could respond. I pictured him standing there, his own phone in his hand, a storm of confusion and terror brewing in his mind. He had tried to put me in a small dark box, and in return I had locked him in a bank vault and was refusing to give him the combination. The first move had been made. The board was set, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt a flicker of something I had thought was gone forever, a quiet, thrilling sense of control. The silent takeover was underway.
The initial shockwave of the account freeze was only the beginning. Andrew had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed his finances were his alone. He had forgotten, or perhaps never truly appreciated, that in a marriage like his, one built on the shaky foundation of lifestyle and appearances, financial stability is a shared resource, and his wife, Sarah, was about to become a very unwilling participant in his downfall. Sarah had always treated me with a kind of polite condescension. She called me Judith, never Mom. She would compliment my home in a way that made it sound like a quaint museum exhibit. "Oh, this old clock is just so charming," she'd say, her eyes sweeping over the grandfather clock Robert's father had built, as if it were a piece of charming junk. She was a woman who valued brand names and social standing above all else. Her support for Andrew's management of my affairs had been enthusiastic. I'm sure she envisioned a future where my erratic spending was curbed, preserving the flow of capital that funded her shopping trips. 2 days after the freeze, Sarah attempted to purchase a ridiculously expensive handbag online, a birthday present to herself. The transaction was, of course, declined. Annoyed, she tried another card, also from Mid-Valley Regional Trust. Declined. Frustrated, she called the bank's Platinum Concierge line, a service she was particularly proud of having access to. She was likely expecting an immediate fawning apology. Instead, she was met with a cool, professional stonewall. "I'm sorry, Mistress Sterling," the agent said, his voice maddeningly calm. "I see a flag on the account. All accounts under the Sterling family name are currently part of a special administrative review. I'm afraid no large purchases can be authorized at this time." The phrase Sterling family accounts was the key. This wasn't just Andrew's problem. This was her problem. The financial house of cards was shared, and the ground was shaking. I heard the story later from Margaret, whose cousin is in Sarah's bridge club. Apparently Sarah's call to Andrew was the stuff of legends. The screaming was audible through a closed door. "What did you do, Andrew?" she had shrieked. "My cards are being declined. They said the family accounts are under review. This is your fault. You and your stupid plan to control your mother. You've ruined us." The family exodus had begun, not with people leaving me, but with Andrew's own wife turning on him. The partner in his scheme had become his chief accuser. His power at home, which was predicated entirely on his ability to provide a certain lifestyle, had evaporated overnight. Desperate, Andrew attempted a counter-move. He did what people in his position always do when they are out of their depth. He called a lawyer. He managed to get a consultation with a rather expensive attorney in the city, no doubt promising to pay him once his accounts were unfrozen. He laid out the situation, painting himself as the concerned son and me as the financially irresponsible parent. He explained that he had canceled my card for my own good, and that in retaliation I had somehow managed to freeze his assets. The lawyer, a sharp man named Peterson, listened patiently. When Andrew was finished, he asked a few simple, pointed questions. "Mr. Sterling, do you have a signed power of attorney document for your mother?" "Well, no," Andrew admitted, "but I am on the account." As a secondary administrator, Peterson clarified, "a position of convenience, not legal authority." "Have you initiated any legal proceedings to have your mother declared financially incompetent by a court?" "A court? Of course not. She's my mother," Andrew said, indignant. Peterson sighed, a sound that likely cost Andrew several $100s. "Then let me be blunt, Mr. Sterling. From a legal perspective, what you did by canceling your mother's primary credit card without her consent and without legal authority could be viewed as a breach of the bank's terms of service and potentially a form of financial harassment. Your mother, on the other hand, seems to have merely reported a security concern to her bank. The bank, in its own discretion, has chosen to launch a review of a client they may deem high risk. You have no legal standing to compel them to stop. In fact, if I were your mother's attorney, I could argue that your actions proved her point, that you are financially reckless and pose a risk. You don't have a case against the bank, and you certainly don't have one against your mother. You have, to put it mildly, shot yourself in both feet. Andrew's desperate counter-offensive had crashed and burned before it even launched. The law was not on his side. He had operated on the basis of familial entitlement, a currency that held no value in the world of legal contracts and banking regulations. The final turn of the screw came a week later. A formal registered letter arrived at his oversized underwater house. It was from the desk of Arthur Albright, President and CEO of Mid-Valley Regional Trust. The letter formally notified him of the ongoing administrative review. It politely requested a vast amount of documentation, 5 years of tax returns, proof of income, a full accounting of his outside assets, and most damningly, a detailed business plan and statement of viability for the loan attached to his fledgling tech company. The letter made specific reference to the original loan agreement, the one co-signed by Robert and Judith Sterling. It was the checkmate. He knew in that moment that I didn't just know about the loan. I was the loan. I was the backstop that had saved him from bankruptcy years ago. His entire financial life was not his own. It was a subsidiary of Judith Sterling Enterprises, a company he never knew existed. The panic must have been absolute. This wasn't just a temporary freeze anymore. This was a full-scale dismantling of the life he had built on a foundation of my money and his father's good name. The power had not just shifted. It had returned to its rightful owner. He was no longer the concerned son managing his mother's affairs. He was a delinquent debtor, about to be called to account. The confrontation came, as I knew it would. It was a Tuesday evening. I was in the living room reading a book, a rather lovely first edition of A Room with a View, when the headlights swept across the front window. A car door slammed, then another. Footsteps, heavy and hurried, on the porch. The doorbell rang, not once but 3 times in quick succession, a frantic, desperate chime. I took my time. I carefully placed my leather bookmark to save my page, set the book on the end table, and smoothed my skirt. I walked to the door and opened it. Andrew was standing there, his face pale and haggard. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his eyes were wide with a terror I had never seen in him before. Beside him stood Sarah, her face a mask of cold fury and fear. She was looking at Andrew with an expression of pure contempt, as if seeing him for the first time as the hollow man he was. "Mom," Andrew said, his voice cracking. It was the first time he had called me that with any sincerity in a very long time. "We need to talk." I stepped back, holding the door open. "Of course," I said, my voice even. "Please, come in." They walked into the living room, the very room where Robert and I had planned our lives, our businesses, our family's future. It felt fitting. They stood awkwardly in the center of the room, 2 shipwrecked passengers washed up on an unfamiliar shore. I gestured to the sofa. "Sit down." They sat. I remained standing, preferring the advantage of height. I looked at my son, this man who had so confidently asserted his authority over me just a few weeks ago. The change was stunning. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading desperation. "Mom, please," he began, leaning forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "I don't know how you did it, how you know Albright, how any of this is happening, but please, you have to stop it. They sent me a letter. They're going to call my mortgage. They're asking for documents for the business loan, the one Dad, the one you—" He couldn't even finish the sentence. I let the silence stretch, letting him dangle in his own unfinished admission of guilt and dependence. I walked over to the mahogany sideboard and picked up the manila folder Arthur Albright had given me. I held it in my hands, feeling its weight. "Andrew," I began, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "you were so very concerned about my erratic spending,
my $100 donations to the animal shelter, my old books. You were worried I was squandering. What was your phrase? Your inheritance. You felt I needed to be protected from myself. So in the spirit of that prudence, I decided it was important that we all get a much clearer picture of our shared financial situation. For your own protection, you understand. I let the phrase, his phrase, land on him like a physical blow. He flinched. Sarah stared at the floor. I stepped forward and gently slid the folder onto the coffee table in front of him. You canceled my Premier Select card, issued by Mid-Valley Regional Trust, a fine regional bank, a bank where, through a series of private holding companies named Crestview Equity and R&J Holdings, your father and I quietly acquired a controlling interest 30 years ago. I am and have been for 2 years now the silent majority owner of that bank, a fact you would have known if you had ever, for a single moment, paid attention to anything other than the balance of your trust fund and the ease with which you could spend our money. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Andrew stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief, first at me, then at her husband. The man she married wasn't the savvy heir to a fortune. He was a fool who had just tried to get his own mother kicked out of a bank she owned. The carefully constructed edifice of her life was crumbling to dust before her very eyes. The administrative review, I continued, my voice as calm as a frozen lake, will continue until I am fully satisfied that your financial affairs are in order and pose no further risk to the bank or to me. And once it is concluded, we will be making some changes. You will be removed as an administrator from all of my accounts, effective immediately. You will find a new bank to hold your mortgage and your business debt. You will refinance on your own merits without my name or my assets guaranteeing you. You are, from this moment on, financially independent. I believe that is what you wanted, is it not? To be in control? Andrew looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears of shock and self-pity. Mom, you can't. I can, I said softly, and I have. Your father and I built a fortress to protect this family. You tried to burn it down, Andrew, not realizing you were standing inside. Now you get to live with the consequences. I looked from him to Sarah, whose face was a stony mask of calculation. She was already mentally packing her bags. The new reality, for both of you, starts now. The immediate aftermath was as messy and unpleasant as I expected, though I observed it from a comfortable distance. Andrew, unable to secure refinancing at any favorable rate given the state of his audited finances, was forced to sell the monstrously large house. They downsized to a small, charmless rental in a neighboring town, the kind of place Sarah would have sneered at a few months prior. Her contempt for him, which had been a simmering undercurrent, became the main feature of their marriage. According to Margaret's Bridge Club intelligence, their arguments were frequent and spectacular. The shiny veneer of their life together had been sandblasted away, revealing the rotten wood beneath. Andrew did call me, about 2 months later. His voice was small, humbled. He apologized. I'm sorry, Mom. I was wrong. I was scared. When Dad died, I panicked. I saw everything slipping away. It was a weak apology, laced with self-serving excuses, but it was an apology nonetheless. I accepted it with a cool, quiet grace. I understand you were scared, Andrew, I told him, but your fear does not give you the right to treat me with such profound disrespect. The door between us was not slammed shut, but it was no longer open. It was closed, and whether he could ever earn the key to open it again remained to be seen. As for me, my life, which had felt like a long gray hallway of grief, suddenly had windows and doors flung open to the sun. The first thing I did was write a substantial check to the animal shelter, enough to fund their spay and neuter program for a full year. They insisted on putting a small plaque by the front door, with gratitude to Judith Sterling. For the first time, I let them. I established the Robert Sterling Memorial Grant for Children's Literacy at the public library, ensuring the new wing would have everything it needed for years to come. I took the Obsidian Dominion card, and I bought a plane ticket, first class, to Florence. I spent a month there, wandering through art galleries, drinking wine in sunny piazzas, and buying all the leather-bound books I could carry. I rediscovered the woman I was before I was a wife, before I was a mother, and long before I was a widow. I found that I was still there, waiting patiently. My son thought he was protecting his inheritance. He saw our family's wealth as a finite pile of gold that he had to guard. What he never understood, what he was too impatient and too self-absorbed to ever see, was that the money was the least valuable thing Robert and I built together. We built a life, a partnership, an empire of two, founded on the bedrock of mutual respect and absolute trust. When Andrew came for my bank account, when he labeled me erratic and incompetent, he wasn't just insulting me. He was desecrating the memory of his father and the very foundation of our life's work. It was never about the money for me. It was never about the books or the donations, the 2 pen. It was about respect. It was about being seen as a whole person, not as an aging caricature. Sometimes, the only way to teach someone to respect your boundaries is to remind them, in no uncertain terms, that you are the one who drew the map. He thought he was taking away my power, when all he did was remind me how much of it I truly had. It wasn't about revenge in the beginning, but in the end, I must admit, the vindication was its own quiet, satisfying reward. Thank you for listening to my story. It's important for us to share these experiences, to remind each other that we are not invisible. If this resonated with you, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel, and perhaps leave a comment to share your own thoughts. Every story shared is a light in the dark. Take care of yourselves, and never ever let anyone make you feel small.